Did the conquest of Canaan actually happen? Give a summary of the scholarship on this.
Well, it seems to be shifting more in the direction of historicity, but the evidence overwhelmingly supports an historical conquest.
Who gives a what you think?
Getting basic concepts of archaeology wrong. The basics!
If you don't have an honest interlocutor, I just don't think it's worth it.
After years of apologetic content, I've reached a conclusion. 60% of apologetics is defending a genocide that never happened, 20% is painting biblical slavery as a super lovey-dovey affair, and at least another 20% is being absurdly overconfident about topics you have zero expertise in.
This is going to be annoying.
And today, you're going to witness such apologetics in action. Recently, Michael Jones, better known as Inspiring Philosophy, was interviewed by Gavin Utterland on the Conquest of Canaan, where he made some rather eyebrow-raising claims.
He must recognize that stuff that he's saying is at a minimum highly, highly debatable.
For instance, that scholars are increasingly convinced it actually happened.
But the evidence overwhelmingly supports an historical conquest.
Spoiler alert, that's not true. And while we don't typically get to witness scholars wincing at such statements, we're occasionally fortunate enough to hear them voice their concerns. Dr. Joshua Bowen and Dr. Kipp Davis did just that on our good friend Apologia's channel. Now, in a perfect world, Michael would have acknowledged that he overreached when treading confidently into areas he has no expertise. But alas, reality had other plans.
What was your overall take of their response here?
Grotesque incompetence.
The man accusing Josh and Kipp of grotesque incompetence is Dr. David Falk, who was invited onto Michael's channel to expose said incompetence. And what you're about to dive into is a 2-hour unraveling, not just of a segment of their response, but a deep exploration of how apologetics operates and why scholars are, shall we say, not greatly impressed. So, without further ado, let's jump in. Why, hello, my fellow apes. I hope you are well. I am joined today by Dr. Kipp Davis and Dr. Joshua Bowen, and we're going to be making a response to Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, who was accompanied by Dr. David Falk. So thank you both very much for joining me, and I'm looking forward to exposing, but really just looking at how apologetics works and how it interacts with criticism, especially from scholars like yourselves, because it's something I point out on my channel a lot. I actually focus on the psychology. I focus on how apologetics is done from that kind of standpoint, as well as from the factual standpoint, especially from a philosophical angle. And there is just so much to be said on this one topic with Inspiring Philosophy, who is, of course, a very big Christian apologist. So, yeah, thank you guys.
Oh, no, pleasure to be back.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having
Anytime.
us.
So just to give everyone some backstory here, just a disclaimer up front. Typically, when I deal with videos like this, I will employ something called the principle of charity, where I'm charitable with them. Hey, they may have misspoke. They may have said something here. We're not using that tonight. As I said in the beginning, if you're not going to be nice to me, I'm not going to be nice to you. So tonight, we are using Kipp Davis rules. So we're going to fixate on errors. We're going to bring them up, highlight them, and question their motives and their ability to do proper research, because these are the Kipp Davis rules, and it's time to use Davis
Oh
rules.
boy, is there reason to question. Wow.
What was your overall take of their response here?
Grotesque incompetence.
Grotesque incompetence, Kipp. What did you do? Like, what's going on? Give us the story. Spill the beans.
Wow, I was a little surprised actually that I brought Michael this close to tears in his intro. I was taken a little bit aback by that. The very first videos I published on YouTube were actually videos responding to stuff that Inspiring Philosophy had done on the documentary Hypothesis, and he didn't like it, and he used much of the same sorts of words in speaking to me about that. He said I was being uncharitable. He said that I was poisoning the well. He said that he figured that it wasn't fair, the way that I responded to him, and honestly, it's kind of been that way since the start. He doesn't like me. He just really, really doesn't like me. I'm convinced of that.
And Josh, how does that make you feel? I mean, you tried your best.
I mean, yeah, I think for me, the way that this whole thing sort of shook out, just from this sort of emotional level, was interesting to me, because there's no question that there are different types of personalities here on the internet, here on social media. Some personalities have very thick skins, right? And so with that thick skin, I'm not a psychiatrist, so forgive me, everybody. I'm just speaking with the experience that I have, or from the experience that I have. But it seems like people that tend to have thicker skins are pretty good at giving, or more, I don't know, more frequently give a little more stinging, can give a little more stinging critiques of people. But they're critiques of their work, for the most part, as far as near as I can tell. And when that, critique is not well met, particularly by somebody with my thinner skin personality, it really hits them hard. And I mean, I'm the first to say that I fall into that category of somebody that I'm a people pleaser. I mean, that surprises Kipp to hear as I say that. He said, "What? What do you mean?"
Crazy.
But to the core, I'm a people pleaser, and it's something that I have to work on. It's something that when I went through my 15 years of grad school, I had to deal with on a weekly basis. And it's something that just sort of develops. And you have to kind of realize that when a professor is handing you back a term paper and it looks like he sacrificed a goat on it, because it's just completely red everywhere from all the mistakes that you made, it's nothing personal. And that's what sort of took me aback here, that this, I don't remember the video being terribly mean. I certainly, Kipp, I would say that you were pointed in several of your comments. I am reticent to be pointed in my comments, so I say things like, I hope he didn't mean that, or it seems to me the way that came across, I'm sure he meant it differently. Like, these are the types of things that I preface what I say with. And that kind of surprised me, because I don't know what it means here to not be charitable. I mean, maybe I'm just not remembering these places where we were just uncharitable. But honestly, I feel like
it's just that at this point, it just feels like something like some of this stuff just feels canned. I guarantee you, if you watch a live stream response that Michael does, he will say the word 6 or 7 times in like every single stream. He's very fixated on this idea of being charitable to your interlocutors, as if the people that he's dealing with aren't. And that's the thing. And Stephen, I'd be interested to hear your opinion, because I think you've seen probably a lot more of Michael's work than I have. But particularly in like the shorts or the TikTok videos, whatever it is that comes up on your YouTube stream, I don't find Michael's demeanor to be particularly kind to the people he's addressing.
And please enlighten us simpletons with your vast knowledge. This is gonna be annoying.
This is just new age nonsense not based in reality.
But the way that I read that is that's part of the game, right? Like this is part of the WWF, right? I'll tell you what I'm gonna do, right? It feels like that works for this. But I mean, like, it doesn't seem like that's something that you should then turn around and go, you were really uncharitable and mean in your tone. Like, that doesn't.
Yeah. When Michael or when apologists stand on stage, their job isn't really that academic, boring truth. So it really is a WWE kind of situation where what you need to do is, it's not so much about the content of what you're discussing. It's not really about the scholarship. It's not really about the facts. It's not really about the philosophy. What it's about is making your audience feel good in their dogma and feel good in their beliefs. They're starting to have doubts. They're hearing people like me point out, like, Deuteronomy's problematic. And so they need someone to be able to fix this. And so when they go to Paul Copan, or if they go to Inspiring Philosophy, what they're looking for is, this person's informed and they're not convinced of it. And they're smarter than me. This is what I need. This is what's going to help me. And so apologetics falls into that. And so there's your first element. The second element is, if you accuse people of what you're doing, when they finally accuse you of what you're of the same, it doesn't hit the same. So, not to get too political, but if Trump runs around saying that they're trying to steal the election, meanwhile he is actually trying to steal the election and trying to rig things, when that's pointed out, it doesn't feel like it hits as much. Likewise, if they accuse you of poisoning the well while they've just poisoned the well, anyone pointing out that they're poisoning the well, it's just a psychological thing with humans that it's quite a smart move to do, even if it's implicit. So you have that going on, and then here is what I think is the most crucial element of what's going on here. People like yourselves, scholars, you work in such a way as to be not unnecessarily kind, but to conduct yourself in a professional manner. And so if someone goes out there and they get something that frankly is really seriously wrong, the general response is to go, I think you're mistaken here. Allow me to offer some critique. And that's great for apologetics, because it's not like this straight up, you do not know what you're talking about. And so they rely on it. They need it because it sounds like they're having a difference with a colleague, not they're getting, dragged across the mud because they're going out there claiming jurisdiction, being very confident on things that they obviously know nothing about. And I think, and it's actually one of the things I really like about watching your stuff, Kipp, you don't quite do that. Your form of communication is to just call it as it is, which you do get in academia, but they're not used to it, and it hurts, and it actually does their reputation a disservice in a way that they can't handle, because if he's out there, as we're going to see, confidently saying that scholars are changing their mind towards one kind of view, and then an actual scholar comes around and goes, you've really got that wrong. So rather than being nice about it, just telling straight up you've got it wrong, that to them that's across the line. That's devastating. That's a bad thing. That means they have to go on and get someone who's not an expert in the field, but actually has a degree in a tangential field, so that they can restore their character. And that is what I think's happened pretty much entirely with him bringing on David Falk.
I'm not going to argue with that. I think that's probably spot on. I do want to say something about this this statement that Falk makes right at the outset about our response being grotesque incompetence. Now, what he's getting at is, and we made some mistakes in the video that we put together, which we'll get to those, and they're going to focus on that. But the thing that I've maintained from the start here is that the presentation that Josh and I give in the video with Apologia, what we're going to talk about today, is mainstream scholarship, right? This is what most scholars working in the field are saying about the texts, about the excavations, about the historical developments in the Levant and in Egypt at the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. It's all pretty standard stuff. And I think when people hear Falk say something like grotesque incompetence, the impression they're getting is that everything that we're attempting to communicate about these mainstream ideas is somehow totally outlandish.
Yeah, so if there's like a small mistake made in one area, or even a relatively large mistake, they can leverage that to be able to say everything you have to say on this topic is grotesque incompetence. which is a classic move that's done. All right, so let's continue. The next clip is a continuation of Michael being very upset, but it really is setting the ground, so it's worth playing.
Grotesque incompetence.
It was like whiplash of problems. Like, okay, that's philosophically a bad argument. Oh, that's just a flat out error there. What? Like, it's just whiplash.
I mean, between the logical fallacy, the misrepresentation of scholarship, the just the getting basic concepts of archaeology wrong. The basics.
Yeah.
It was bad. It was really, really bad.
So I think he likes you guys. I might be wrong.
There are a couple of things that, again, as we go through these responses, it'll become clear to what they're referring and how we will respond to these quote unquote basic concepts of archaeology, for example. And to me, what I found very interesting about the response, and again, to be charitable, they said at the outset, we're not going to go through the whole thing. I get that. But by strategically, and I thought it was a good strategy, to be fair, like from a rhetorical standpoint, I think it was a good strategy that they employed. Not really from an academic one. They hyperfixated on certain small points. Many of them they got wrong in their critique, and that's okay. We'll talk about it. But the things that they did get right in their critiques, let them all stand. Let's say even the things that are debatable, Kipp and I got them all wrong, the things that they critiqued us on. In the end, it doesn't hit on some of the major points that were the major critiques that we were making of the video conversation that he and Gavin had. So that's what's interesting to me. Like saying basic concepts of archaeology, like casemate walls not being something that happens until the Middle Bronze Age or something. And that's the first thing in every archaeology introduction to Levantine archaeology book that you get to. Like, okay, let all those things stand and let him be right on all of those. It feels like the key example of missing the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
Or it's apologetics. And so what happens is you either consciously or unconsciously, both of which are really damning in this case, what you do is you look at the critique, you ignore the big things, you focus and hyperfocus on the small things, you only show your audience the small things, you allow yourself to speak in a very condescending and nasty fashion by accusing your opposition of doing it first, so that if they ever accuse you of doing it, it looks a little bit odd, and then you can get away with it. And the thing is the vast majority of his audience are not going to look it up because they're not there for the truth. What they're there for is confirmation.
Affirmation.
I know it's quite a condemning thing for me to say, but I've been doing counter-apologetics for a very long time. I've conducted a lot of conversations and had a lot of debate in this field, and that is what's going on. It missing the forest through the trees is not recognizing that's what's going on, which is in stark contrast to what they present themselves to be, which is in the academic field, caring about the facts, caring about the crucial disagreements rather than some little periphery thing. Another thing to be said is that with them opening out in this way, that they are telling you straight that they're not going to be charitable with whatever critiques you guys are giving them. They're giving themselves a license to not conduct themselves in a bad way. By their rules, they're allowing themselves to scoop as low as you, Kipp. But like, is that really Christian? Is that really how you do academic work? Do you not rise above this stuff? Do you not just say, here's my other cheek? Like, what's going on? Like, shouldn't you do better?
It is interesting. I did notice on a number of the comments on this particular video after they went live and Michael uploaded it. There were a lot of people who weren't happy about the demeanor and the tone that he took in this particular exchange, and for that reason, right?
Absolutely.
And I will say this. sorry, Kipp. This is you know it's going to shine out of me somehow, and I use the word shine there to make myself feel better. It's never our intent to hurt anyone. In the same way that it's never like your doctoral advisor. It's never his intent, I hope, to hurt you.
I was going to say some of us.
Sometimes. Some of us. Maybe mine, you know. But even there, I mean, I think theirs is still at a subconscious level, and the hurt that they're trying to inflict, they think, is for a purpose, for the greater good. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, not everybody is like Ted Lewis. Ted Lewis was one of my Hebrew Bible professors at Hopkins, and he frequently would send back papers with red all over them. And you'd flip to the last page without any exception, and it would say, "Great attempt. You know, really good try. Can see all your efforts shining forth. Keep up the good work." You know, he's just that kind of guy after he's completely laid you waste on your dumbass argument, right? And so that takes extra effort, and that takes a certain type of personality, and not everybody has that. And so, you know, this is why I think Kipp and I are actually a really good balance, because Kipp is very much like, well, that was wrong, and here's why. And I'm like, you know, I really think that you put some good energy into that, and I can kind of see what you're saying, right? And so we kind of balance each other out. But I do think that both of us would say, and Kipp, you can correct me, but like I don't think there ever is a time that we're like trying to be malicious, or that we're trying to be uncharitable. I don't think that ever happens.
And I think part of one of the things that I think often gets misconstrued as being uncharitable or mean or hitting below the belt is that, like, even though we're scholars, Josh and I both recognize that in this venue, you also have to be a bit of an entertainer too, right? Mm-hmm. You got to get people's attention. You got to make things engaging or interesting or funny if you can. And I think oftentimes when we think we're joking or just being edgy and entertaining, other people are going to misconstrue that as somehow malicious too, right? And it's a different kind of field. It's not the same as giving a paper at a conference. Although I've seen some you know, full on shouting matches in, you know, sessions at conferences.
Yeah, I mean, Michael's been in this field for a while. He should know that if he's going to definitively, confidently state something that's not true, then it's okay for someone to point out you've really got that wrong. And if he's going to get upset about that fact, that's his problem. It's not your problem. You know, like if he gets the critique from Josh going, "That's a lovely polished turd," or he gets one from Kipp saying, "That is a turd."
The turd.
Suck it up, right? Like that's the way it works. If you're going to confidently make these statements, tough.
Astonishing to me that he doesn't seem to recognize that what he's saying, even if I might concede that it's not completely wrong, he must recognize that stuff that he's saying is at a minimum highly debatable.
And can I give an example? Because I think it's a very charitable example, but it's one that stands out. I was watching a conversation, can't remember. Oh no, it was the one that David just put out, a clip on his Deep Drinks podcast clips.
Oh, David McDonald. And it was from the interview that I guess he did with Michael at some point in the past. Not to put too fine a point on it. And
Michael started talking, they talked about slavery, or they talked about something in the law. I think it was slavery. And Michael said, well, I don't think that the laws in the Hebrew Bible are like normative legislation or something like that. I think what they are is wisdom literature. I think they're, there for more didactic reasons. I think that, and the way that he was presenting it was from like an authoritative position. Now, whether he intended that or not, it had that air of authority, right? And this would be akin to me saying, well, I think the right answer to the problem of evil is to think about this in the way that Hudson talks about it, right? Isn't he the guy with the rabbit and the shovel? And yeah, anyway. So
I'm lost. So.
Yeah, right. As am I. But the point is, if I say that with confidence, right, somebody that like Stephen's sitting there probably going, okay, like that's one way to address
well, I'm
the problem
thinking
of evil.
I've done a lot on the problem of evil, but I'm like, ooh, maybe I don't know this one.
Right,
what's he got
but
a
I mean,
bow tie
like-
on? Maybe he's got one that I don't. I'm bored. I'm confident. It's done.
But the point is that when Michael presents himself, he often presents himself as this authority. And the problem with this example is that, and I mean this kindly, because that would be the exact same thing that I would anticipate a philosopher would say to me: who gives a shit what you think about that?
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that, so that it's very clear, is Michael, I suspect, has not read the original languages, right? Hasn't read the Sumerian, hasn't read the Akkadian of the law collections, hasn't read the Hebrew of the Hebrew Bible law collections. And so hasn't really done the legwork into ancient Near Eastern law that would be required, I think, to come up with an opinion that matters, right? I suspect that he's reading John Walton and adopting John Walton's position, or Dilbert Hiller's, right? He's reading people that also hold this position, and he's reading why they hold it. And he kind of has like an idea of, maybe he even has an idea of some of the other positions, but there's like his opinion on it as a non-specialist. It's great that he has an opinion on it, but it's the same as my opinion on the problem of evil. Like, I am not studied up on the problem of evil. So if I tell somebody who's interviewing me, well, here's my opinion, guess what? It's the same shit that I'm going to say about the law collections, right? I wrote a chapter in a book on this, and I say, hey, I am not a legal specialist in the ancient Near East. So I'm just going to lay out what the different positions are, their strengths, their weaknesses. But the reality here is that if you want an informed opinion, one that has the expertise behind it that I think is required to do that, you probably need to go talk to Bruce Wells. You probably need to read some Raymond Westbrook. You probably need to read Martha Roth. Like, in other words, I'm not presenting myself in any way as that authority that makes my opinion the one that you should care about.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Compound that. It does. It completely makes sense. And you compound it with the fact that if you don't just go, what should be done in this case? And like I do this because I will speak about science, or I'll speak about, the Bible, or I'll speak about even philosophy, even these places where I don't have any kind of decent knowledge behind. Even the places where I do have knowledge. What you do is you say, this is my opinion, and here is why. And you reference the scholars that are in the field. You reference the work that's in the field. You present the evidence. You do not present yourself as the expert when you're not recognized in that sense.
And to be fair,
if you're going to present a view if you present a view that's actually at odds, you don't say that it's not at odds with what the consensus is. And if you are going to present a view that is at odds, you damn well be transparent about it, unless your job is to soothe your flock, in which case you don't. You don't reveal that information. And
I want to be fair here, right? Because it's more nuanced. Like Michael definitely, in that conversation that I'm referencing, definitely said here, like he said Dilbert Hillers, and he said John Walvoord. or John Walton, sorry, John Walton. Like he did say those names. There was another one that he said, and I can't remember it. So I'm not suggesting that he doesn't say them, but there's something subtle, and I may not be articulating it very well, but the way that he presents it as if it's a meaningful opinion. It's meaningful that he has that opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And in that context, I don't think it's as meaningful as he's presenting it. Because it wouldn't be meaningful for me to present it.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be meaningful for me to say, look, I think that these law collections are legal treatises. And they're probably representative in some respect of what was going on in the law at the time, but they're not normative legislation. I would hope that Bruce Wells, hearing that, would say, who cares what you think about it, right? This isn't what you do. This is what I do, right? And so he specializes in the same way that if I said, yeah, I think the documentary hypothesis is actually the correct way to go, I would hope Joel Baden would say, but who gives a fuck, right? Because you're not a Pentateuchal specialist. Well, like, let me say that, right? Let me make that, because that's his area of specialization. Now that, and I'll shut up after this. I'm so sorry. I may be wrong about this. That may be my inner desire to not say anything authoritatively unless I know everything about it. Maybe that's what this is. So maybe I'm just wrong here about that. But that's the way that it comes across to me. And I think that's why it draws the ire of people that are specialists in the field when they hear stuff like that.
I think it is a shock for a lot of scholars to realize how the broader conversation is, and it doesn't play by the same rules. Talking of the same rules, we will be accused, of course, of poisoning the well here, which is a fallacy, but it's not really a fallacy. Like, a lot of philosophers, a lot of people look at it and they say, actually, poisoning the well is perfectly fine if you're trying to, lots of people think poisoning the well is just a bad thing, but it actually isn't. So suppose that we're about to talk about someone who doesn't have an expertise in archaeology telling us that the pyramids were built by aliens. Telling people that at the beginning and unfolding some of their past transgressions, that's an important thing of value. And so what we're doing here is we are providing that value. Now, of course, they do accuse you guys of poisoning the well, and they definitely accuse us now of poisoning the well because it gives them a reason not to actually listen to the critiques that are about to come, let alone what's already been said. But it's a different game, unfortunately. I'd like to say you get used to it, but you don't.
So again, we'll be using Kipp Davis rules tonight. I think that's only fair.
I think it's fair.
And he says I should excuse myself from participating in this because I've made so many errors. Well,
let's quote that exactly, because that's delicious.
And to be fair, Kipp did acknowledge that he made an error with the Amarna letters under
we'll get to that
video, which we'll get to that. And the problem is in his attempt to fix his obvious errors, he made even more errors in that comment, which we will get to. So. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, ladies and gentlemen. So
Kipp said,
a lot of issues here.
When you are when you are consistently getting the scholarship wrong, this should disqualify your participation from the discussion. End quote.
Yeah.
Will he live by his words? No.
Whatever you're doing, Kipp, I'm jealous. I need to learn. Like, you've triggered the hell out of these people.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
oh my goodness.
I guess I've just got one of those faces, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
I think so.
It.
They quote you saying that if you're getting things this wrong, then you should probably stop talking about the topic. And of course, they're going to conflate you making a small mistake with the many, many mistakes that Michael makes confidently, because they're the same. Apparently, that's how it works now.
Yeah. And I don't know. I tend to feel like, in terms of the context for that statement that I made in the original video, in my mind, and maybe I did not communicate this clearly enough, but when I'm talking about making mistakes in the discussion, this has to do mostly with how we're characterizing the major points within the discussion and where people stand on those, and how those are actually being engaged within the field. And I continue to maintain, given this response to the work that Josh and I did, because from wire to wire, it just really feels like Michael and David have both completely missed the point of why we even made that video in the first place.
It's a feature, it's not a bug, in my opinion. So now that we've set the ground, what we can look at here, this is what Michael had to say. We'll be using Kipp Davis rules, absolutely. This is my modus operandi, bro. Come on, you watch my content. So
I need to take out a patent, apparently.
Yeah, that's it. Actually, I say that I should take on your rules and just, you're doing it right. I promise you. But yeah, we're about to see Michael and what he originally said and what caused this entire catastrophe. And of course, it will be followed up with both of you on our lovely brother from another mother, Paul. So we're gonna see Michael now speaking confidently, as just outlined by Josh.
Give a summary of the scholarship on this in terms of, did the conquest of Canaan actually happen? What is the overall state of scholarship on a question like that?
Well, it seems to be shifting more in the direction of historicity. It definitely seems to be moving away from the old Deaver or Finkelstein idea that this was all mythology written later. Now, that still seems to be the consensus, especially among critical scholars for sure, but the evidence overwhelmingly supports an historical conquest. A lot of what you're going to hear is that, well, there was no evidence of widespread mass destruction throughout Canaan.
Let's really track the dialectic of what's going on, because that's what they want you to miss. Right. So we got Gavin, who's asking Michael to give a summary of the scholarship on whether the conquest of Canaan actually happened. Michael has replied by saying that there has been a shift towards historicity and away from the idea of mythology, even though the mythological view is still the consensus among critical scholars. Michael literally said the evidence overwhelmingly supports a historical conquest, right?
But the evidence overwhelmingly supports an historical conquest.
So very big statements. Look at how confidently he stated those things, as if he is an expert in the field, as if this is said and done. And this really is the baseline, at least as far as I can see, of where you both looked at it and thought, there's a few issues here.
Yeah, you get it.
Yeah, I think that so much of this, for me anyway, is perception. When you have a guest on your show and you're interviewing them, I think the default that the audience is going to take, or at least this is how it seems for me, is that you're interviewing them because they have some expertise in this topic, right? Like, why else would you bring somebody in? So here we're going to sit down, or say Gavin's going to say, okay, Michael, you have some expertise in this. Tell us, what's the state of the field? Well, first of all, understanding the state of the field in a particular topic for someone who is in that field is still difficult to do. If you ever read a dissertation, or you read a dissertation-like or dissertationally structured, that wasn't English, monograph, you'll see that they're going to have a history of research section. They're just going to go through and say, what have scholars, what have scholars written on this? What have they said about this up till the time of writing? Because part of the reason that you do that is so that you're not, caught writing a huge dissertation and your advisor goes, yeah, like Frank wrote about that 30 years ago and it's been completely, how do you not know that, right? So part of the reason is so that you don't make an ass out of yourself. But, the bigger reason is so that you can stand on the shoulders of giants, right? That's what you want to be able to do. So those are the people that understand the state of the field, somebody that has done that amount of legwork. And is it possible that Michael knows the state of the field? Sure, that's possible. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot to really wrap your head around, but sure, that's possible. The problem is, I don't think that Michael would actually say that he has that kind of a handle on the state of the field. I don't think if you asked him directly, Michael, do you feel like you're equipped to really address that question? He would probably say, like, well, no, but I've read, whatever book that he'd read, and that book said,
I read this. I read 5 views.
Right. Right. There you go. I mean, and for a non-specialist, that's awesome. Right. Yep. That's awesome. I would never pick on anybody for like giving their opinion on something or giving what they think about something just in general. The problem is, because people do that all the time, and I think that's great for these discussions. The problem is when you've been brought in as an apparent expert on something, that's where you open yourself up to, okay, like that's not the state of the field. And you're going to get pushback on that. And sometimes it'll be kind of sharp if you're allowing yourself to be presented as this authority. That's what seems like happened here.
And you should get pushback. Like, you want to talk about like grotesque behavior. That's a really bad thing to do. But again, it's a feature in apologetics. It's madness. Like, this stuff is laughed out. He thinks that you're being uncharitable by just going, yeah, that's wrong. What he should really be getting when he's going in and making statements like this and acting as an authority and making statements that are not the consensus, it's just abysmal, but unfortunately it's treated as a perfectly fine thing. And he isn't alone. I mean, take, for instance, the apologist Frank Turek. He'll run around, William Lane Craig as well, and this is just on the Kalam cosmological argument. They'll run around and they will make definitive statements about fields that they do not have an expertise in, and their statements are contrary to what the actual scholars and what the actual scientists believe. They say things such as, we know that the universe began to exist. The Big Bang was the beginning of everything. Now, if you're in the know, if you do some research, that's bullshit. That's a polished turd right there. That's completely false. But if you don't know any better, you don't need to demonstrate proficiency, because your audience don't know as much as you, and they're not there for the truth. They're there to hear you speak confidently on the topic. And if they're going to go around doing this, and then an actual physicist comes around and goes, dude, you really messed up there. Like, they've got no business turning around and saying, we're going to go by your rules now and be nasty to each other. No, you've already shat the bed, right? They're just pointing it out.
I'm actually not sure what he means by this. Like, on the one hand, he says that it is shifting more in the direction of historicity. On the other hand, that still seems to be the consensus. Who are the scholars in this small minority that are shifting toward historicity, whatever that means?
So what we have there is you, Josh, expressing incredulity at Michael's claim. You're asking for more specificity. Want to expand upon it at all, or simple as that, really?
I mean, I just want to point out that maybe I should apologize, because that felt scathing on my part.
Oh, you poison the well, you freaking quote mind. Like, oh my goodness, man.
Out of context.
Well, that wasn't mean, right? I mean, I don't feel like that was. I don't feel like that was mean.
This is why it's not Josh rules. It's Kipp rules.
Okay.
You see?
Okay.
He recognized you being a nice guy. Okay, you're the good cop. He's okay with that. All right. So Michael said that the consensus is changing. Yeah, go on. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, this is part of the problem with this whole thing is, and this is something, I've encountered recently. When Josh and I announced that we're going to be doing this series of responses to Michael and Falk, we've been getting a lot of pushback on Twitter and on YouTube about how we should just sit down and have a debate with one of them or with both of them. And I think my problems with that are totally clearly presented by just the question that Gavin raised. Did the conquest of Canaan actually happen?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to hear Josh and me say, I say it a lot, the conquest of Canaan did not happen. Now, what I mean by that is that the conquest of Canaan, as it's presented in the book of Joshua, did not happen. What I don't mean by that is that there was no incursions from outside of Israel or outside of the Levant at the end of the Bronze Age, which, ended up contributing to the destruction of cities and the eventual shift of cultures and social groups. So it's such a just the question as it's posed on its own. People hear this question, they hear this statement or this claim, and they've already sort of made up their idea as to what they think it means. And I think so often apologists like Michael, like David Falk, take advantage of that ambiguity. And in so doing, they end up losing, like, so much of this whole conversation is just what is lost in the nuance of what we're talking about and what scholars are talking about, because questions like this, situations like this are difficult. There's a ton of moving parts to putting together historical models for the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age in the Levant. And it's not just as simple as saying, there's a yes and no answer to this question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. An analogy that might be accurate, you tell me if it's fair. If you was to say that Achilles in the Iliad and what happened at Troy, according to Homer, that didn't happen. That isn't the same as you saying there was never such a thing as Troy. It's that's what's going on here, and it would be ironically uncharitable for them, but they're allowed to because it's Kipp Davis' voice, so maybe that's fine.
I mean, I get a lot. People ask, and Kipp, I know you do too. They will ask, do scholars think that the Exodus happened? And my response in most of those contexts is, well, I guess it depends on what you mean by Exodus and happened, right? And that sounds like, it sounds like
feel like you're being pedantic, or
but
nitpicky, but it
matters. That nuance matters.
Really does. It matters so much.
Oh, for sure. You mentioned about the requests that you get to debate them. It's always an interesting thing, because sometimes you'll see a situation where a scholar will sit down and debate someone who is in this field, not realizing that they have a good chance of losing. Not because the other person knows the field better than them, but because they understand the game better. They know how to work these things. You see this a lot. One thing that a lot of people do when it comes to apologetics is they underestimate the apologist based on their academic credentials and based on their academic vigor. And that's a mistake. So it's always a worry to do it. No,
you're absolutely right. It reminds me of, it must have been 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago. I remember reading a blog post. I don't remember who wrote it, but the title of the blog post was something to the effect of don't debate William Lane Craig.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of the blog post was that you will lose if you debate William Lane Craig, because he's a skilled debater. Right, he's got his rhetoric polished to a T, and all that means is that he can make a persuasive argument that's going to convince his audience. Scholars aren't interested in that. I mean, scholars do not care about the public perception of their ideas so much as they care about being right. getting the facts straight and winning the what's the word I'm looking for? Winning the approval of their own peers, right?
Yeah, winning the appearance. Yeah, no, absolutely. And
There
William Lane
was-
Craig is a very strong example of that. He is phenomenal at debates, but everyone that knows anything about metaphysics cringe, like full on cringe at what he has to say. Like his whole Hilbert's Hotel thing, that's amazing for the layperson because it's a really odd thing with the nature of infinite. Everyone in the field, all of them, almost all of them, will look at it and just go, "Yeah, that's not a problem." Like, what are you doing? It's cringe. Peter Van Inwagen recently said this, actually. But no, it's a great example of William Lane Craig. It doesn't matter. Almost everyone will still lose to the man because he is fantastic at debating. It takes a Sean Carroll to go toe to toe with someone like that.
I remember the first, like some of the first videos that I watched on YouTube in like 2018. Shut up, both of you. were
I don't
like
believe you.
okay. I mean, outside. Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That required nuance as well. Were these debates? I was consistently watching YouTube more in 2018. I was doing grad work before that. Anyway, and there was a debate between a young Earth creationist and a evolutionary biologist. And the evolutionary biologist said in his opening, and I'll never forget it, he said, "I very well may lose this debate, but no one should have their confidence in evolution or evolutionary biology weakened or anything because of my loss. My opponent is incredibly skilled at rhetoric and debating, and I am not. So I probably will lose this debate." And like that stands out to me because that's I put a YouTube post, community post up today or yesterday, I can't remember.
It was yesterday.
It was yesterday. And about debates, because I will debate. Just there are certain circumstances that I won't. And I go into it all there. But yeah, I think that if we're really interested in moving the academic discourse forward, if you don't have an honest interlocutor, I just don't think it's worth it.
And I will just add to that most people that debate, that is performative. I've even accepted that for myself when I'm defending atheism or when I'm on stage. When I'm on stage, that's not the time when I'm going to be, even just subconsciously, I'm going to be open. If people get to that debate stage, they're confident, they know what they're doing. It's something to watch out for. But the fact that you know that's good. But back to Michael, what we've got is him saying that the consensus is changing, to which Josh has said, "Show me some receipts, dude. Just show them." That's where we're at so far, and let's see how upset, how irate they are. It's hectic.
Dr. Falk, you've talked about that over the past couple of years. What do you have to say on that comment?
Well, I mean, you do have conservative scholars that have sort of pushed back against this. You also have maximalist scholars, and they're not the same necessarily as conservatives. There are people who are coming into the field now that are more maximalist in sort of terms of what are the their approach to the ancient texts. Okay?
Yeah, so I'll start here. Okay, so there's some clarification that's required because I think Falk's equivocating. People hear these terms, minimalist and maximalist, and they think they understand what these mean, but these actually belong within a broader historical context of biblical scholarship. So like the designation of biblical minimalists and biblical maximalists developed in the 1980s and the 90s with the emergence of the so-called Copenhagen school. And these are people who were promoting this idea that the biblical text was composed out of whole cloth in the post-Babylonian period. And this was a reaction to what's called the Albright School, which is a group of biblical scholars who for decades sought to find correspondences between archaeological discoveries and biblical narratives. So the minimalists were typically those who objected to there being anything historically verifiable within the biblical accounts. They're saying you can't directly connect X with Y. You can only assume this connection on like the most flimsy of data points. While the maximalists, they tended to posit that, at least in very broad strokes, the biblical texts were useful as historical sources, and many stemmed from or contained faint echoes of traditions contemporary with events that are corroborated through archaeology. So, like a biblical minimalist would say that there's no connection at all between like the city of David and then the stories of David in 1st and 2nd Samuel, while a maximalist would cautiously suggest that in very broad outlines at least, there are 10th or 9th century, there was a 10th or 9th century Judean kingdom controlled from a center in Jerusalem that seems to have been the ruling seat for the house of David. So, I mean, I pulled a quote here from Joel Baden's book, The Historical David, and this is from the introduction. He says, recognition that even the Bible presents an idealized David, and that the Bible is the only written source of information that we have about David's life, has led some scholars in the past few decades to claim that David never existed at all. They argue that the biblical David is not an idealization of a real historical figure, but is rather an invention out of whole cloth, a projection into the past by later kings who wanted to legitimate their lineage and status and who created a legendary founding figure against whom to compare themselves. Yet this is akin to claiming that England's Henry V never existed if we have no source information other than Shakespeare's idealized good king. To a certain extent, these scholars have bought the spin of the Bible as fully as those who, like the famous, I think it was a Puritan commentator, Matthew Henry, called David a saint. So what I'm getting at here is that when Michael and David are using these terms to refer to how scholars think about the Exodus, they're not actually reflective of how biblical scholars and Levantine archaeologists understand these terms. So, I mean, I guess within their little group of evangelicals who are arguing about the nuances of an historical Exodus, there are maximalists and minimalists. But as far as I'm aware, this isn't language that is used by, critical scholars and archaeologists when it comes to the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and the biblical texts.
And that's a major point in the sense of, if I was speaking about, say, a philosophical argument that pertains to necessity, or even just pertains to metaphysics, and I use the word necessary, not to mean necessary that's meant in the philosophical literature, which is basically it's impossible that it couldn't have existed, but rather I mean necessary in some colloquial term, I need to make that clear. I need to specify that. I need to, otherwise I've just got some ability to live in this vaguity, this vague confident sphere where I'm not actually helping the dialectic move forward. So that's a great point. I didn't notice the equivocation. So the main thing I have noticed here, and I think that this is a major problem, but it's actually, again, really common in apologetics. So what I'm seeing here is a subtle change in the claim that Michael actually put across. So Michael's original claim was that scholars are progressively changing their perspective in favor of the conquest of actually happening. But
on
upon
the
being
basis of
asked,
overwhelming evidence.
yeah, oh yeah, precisely. And yet, soon as Josh or anyone has just very nicely come up and said, "Can I have some receipts for that, please?" He and David have changed the claim to conservative scholars and maximalist scholars have a historical perspective. So this is a Mott and Bailey routine. It may be conscious, it may not, but they've issued a controversial statement. So that's the Bailey. It's the thing that's really, really difficult to defend. And when there's been pressure, when someone's come knocking for the knocking on the gates, they've retreated to a modest position, a Mott, which is easy to defend. It's a really common fallacy. It happens across the board. So I'll give an example just so that everyone can see what I'm trying to get at here. So here's an example of a Bailey. We should abolish all public education because it's completely ineffective and a waste of time. So suppose I say that, right? Big statement. And then Josh comes along and goes, receipts, please. What's going on? Tell me what's going on. And then I defend and I say, I move from that spot to the spot that I can actually defend. And I go, look, I'm just saying that there are some inefficiencies in public education that could be improved. See, the way that I see it is that Michael said that scholars are changing their minds. That's his controversial Bailey. And yet when pressed, he's moved with David to saying that conservative scholars and maximalist scholars are in favour of a historical account. But if they had just said that from the beginning, if Michael had just said that statement from the beginning, would you have had so much of a problem, Josh?
No. And see, this is the other problem. And I'll probably get accused of not calling him before before saying this. I don't want to assume anything about this. How about that? I don't want to assume anything about this. The way that his statement came across to me and to Kipp, and I think probably to most people watching, was that the conquest narrative in the Hebrew Bible presents a historically reliable account of what happened at the transition from the late Bronze Age to the early Iron Age. Mm-hmm. And it seems like where we are now in the discussion is, well, look, there's been a move away from minimalism. And like scholars are saying things like, yeah, there might be some kernel of historical truth to the Exodus and the Conquest. And Chris Rolston is going to be, sort of cited here in that. But see, like I probably, in my non-late Bronze Age, early Iron Age specialization, I think it seems perfectly reasonable to me to say that there was a small group of people that may have come up out of Egypt, that may have come up from the south and entered into the highlands and brought with them a story about deliverance, and that became part of the tradition, or became the tradition, developed the origin story. That sounds reasonable. That's fine. Mm-hmm. Nobody would have a problem with that. I know a lot of specialists in the field that would hold to that view. Not all of them, obviously, but I mean, I don't think anybody that's not the contentious statement. And so I think, is there a move back away from minimalism? I mean, yeah, I don't think there was such a huge move toward it. At least the way that it's being portrayed, seemingly. So yeah, that's where I think, had he said, look, there are a lot of scholars that think that, yeah, the biblical texts don't really, we can't just read the Bible and reconstruct history, but that there's probably some historical, kernel of truth behind it. I'd been like, man, that's awesome. Nice job. High five, right? Let's move on. Yeah, well, there you go. There's another Mott and Bailey. Overwhelmingly, scholars have this view. Little bit of pressure. I'm just saying that some of them do. It's not a big claim. Come on, man. Don't bully me. I didn't go too far. Another thing to be said here is it actually really that surprising that conservative and maximalist scholars have that kind of view? I mean, if that was one of the ways that you can tell that he is switching up part of his claim, is that if you actually take him at what he's saying, it's puzzling why you would have any problem whatsoever.
and yet it doesn't resonate with the audience to think, yeah, this seems like a straw man. This seems like someone's got the wrong end of the stick. Are they really that stupid? I guess they are. It makes me feel. I don't know what's going on,
Well,
but like,
the amazing thing about this here, Stephen, is that when in a few minutes, when David talks about the cadre of Egyptologists who accept, or as they say, believe in an Exodus, he'll mention that a whole bunch of them are Muslims. Right? Like, I don't know that that's really making the case that they want to make for this.
Kipp wanted to say sick flex, bruh.
You also have a cadre of Egyptologists, and Moore talks about this in her book, where you've got this group of Egyptologists that are looking at the data from a different vantage point, from a different theoretical framework, and basically saying, yeah, there might be something to this whole Exodus and Conquest thing.
Boy, what theoretical framework? What does something mean in that sentence? I mean, it's also very painfully vague.
don't ask for receipts. You know what happened last time?
Yeah. And when I said on Gavin's channel, I said conservative, I was thinking maximalist, but I didn't think I had time to explain that because Gavin wanted to briefly talk about the archaeology before moving on to ethical issues. So I just figured, well, for a layman audience, conservative, more people would understand that versus liberal.
Christopher Ralston is a maximalist, but he's not a conservative.
Fair. Yeah. Fair point. Yeah.
And yet he believes in a Conquest and an Exodus.
Yeah. And there's also variation. You have like the Levite hypothesis. You have variation.
Yeah, Freeman's. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you have Rensburg's theory with 1100s, I believe. So I mean, there's variation. So
yeah, there's variation.
I'm sorry, but at this point, I mean, Michael's is basically rehearsing the table of contents for the 5 views of the Exodus book. Which I didn't notice, right, until after watching his video, because I had never read 5 views on the Exodus before. So I don't know. It's funny to me.
I detected no sarcasm there. I hope they clip it.
Right.
Okay, let's really drive the dialectic, because that's the thing that they want people to lose. Michael claimed that put it this way. Michael claims that he specified conservative, but he didn't. Not only this, when he said conservative, he apparently meant maximalist. So you've got this framework of mistakes going on. Why can't he just say straight up, yeah, I misspoke. Yeah, I got that wrong. Yeah, I didn't articulate myself very well there. Why can't that just be, you know what? Yeah, Josh is right to ask for receipts because I overstated the case. I misspoke. Why can't he do that? If he wants to talk about charity, if he wants to talk about conducting oneself in a professional manner, in a non-Kipp Davis way, then isn't this his opportunity to do so? I don't know if you feel the same way, but like it seems very obvious that he's not imbuing the very values that he says that we should be doing.
I don't want to, I suspect that in a similar situation, I would be tempted to try to hold in admitting something like that. And it's interesting to me, we'll get to it. I think, I'm not sure actually if it's one of the clips. There's a part here, of course, where they hammer Kipp. And from the beginning, they're planning on hammering Kipp about this, saying, how did you do it? 13th century instead of 1300s?
1300s. Yeah.
And I mean, it's like this piece of chum in the water that's circling around that they're all looking at and they're getting, oh, I can't wait till we can just And Michael makes the exact same mistake like 10 minutes before they launch into this meaty flesh. And he says, and I don't even remember what it was, but he says something like, the 12 the 1200s. I mean 12th century. And it's just gone. Just move right on by it. And to me, you know, I may have made a recording of it, may have put both of them together, may have sent it to our group chat with Kipp and Dan McClellan and said, you know, who makes a mistake like that? I may have done that. No, but I mean, like, we all make those mistakes, right? We all make those mistakes. But it was the fact that they just, so I get it. I get that if the point here is to hammer on some, you know, little thing for rhetorical purposes, that you're going to be very reticent to, you know, voice, you know, acknowledge your own. But again, like, I would hope that...
Swing that hammer, tiny dancer.
Poetry.
I hope that as we progress, we all strive to do even better than we've done before.
Bert, you remember the talk we just had about the differences between minimalists and maximalists and how confusing this can be, right? So, I mean, yeah, of course, Christopher Rolston is a maximalist. I mean, in the same sense that I think most biblical scholars are maximalists. This whole minimalist-maximalist conversation was something that was kind of took place in the 1990s and is not really part of the conversation now, but there's a spectrum, right? Like, there's a spectrum of scholars who you've got, you know, some on one end who are like, yeah, nothing in the text at all. You can trace back historically. You can't use the text as to teach about history. Gad Barnea is an example of someone who has publicly said, you know, he dismisses these texts. He says you can't use them. They're not useful historical documents. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got I guess the conservative maximalist kind of scholars that Michael's talking about. Now, most everybody else, like the vast majority of everyone's kind of clustered in the middle here, which is where you will find Chris Rolston. So I think this comes from a blog post, and I think the blog post was actually something he wrote about the monoball inscription. I won't get into that. That's all very interesting stuff. People can check out at their leisure. But in a blog post from a couple of years ago, he said this: "It's perhaps useful for me to mention in this connection that the consensus view among those such as I who believed that there was some sort of exodus and there was also some sort of entrance into the land of Canaan for at least some of the proto-Israelites, and that there were at least some battles. As part of that is that the 13th century BCE is the operative century for the Exodus and the Conquest, based on the convergence of a fair amount of evidence, biblical and otherwise." And he's arguing in this, just to give people a sense of the context here, he's arguing against Scott Stripling and the Associates of Biblical Research, which is a Christian apologetic organization that is set on this idea of there being an Exodus and a conquest in it's either the 15th or the 16th century BCE as opposed to the 13th century. So all he's saying is that if, you know, any kind of evidence that there is for, you know, the Exodus and the conquest, it tends to be drawn out of the 13th century, not the 15th century. So, and then he cites a popular book by Richard Elliott Friedman called Exodus: How It Happened and Why It Matters, who argues pretty strongly actually for an early Iron Age migration. So sometime in the 13th century, he argues for this early Iron Age migration of proto-Israelites from Egypt. But then Friedman goes on to say this in that book about the conquest. This is what he says: "The authors of the book of Joshua imagined that there had to have been a great conquest. They imagined that Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, walls come tumbling down, sun stood still in the sky, and Canaanite cities were destroyed. They even introduced the idea that Joshua circumcised all of Israel in preparation for that conquest, because they now envisioned all of Israel, not just the Levites, because he holds to this idea that the Exodus tradition comes specifically from this group of Levites who end up integrating themselves into the Confederation of Israelites. So not just the Levites practicing circumcision. They needed the mass numbers. They needed the conquest, and they needed circumcision. In this case, our archaeological evidence indicates that no such arrival of conquering masses ever took place. The destruction layers are just not there on the sites. And our earliest source, the Song of Miriam, which appears in Exodus chapter 15, does not mention it. Where do we find a destruction layer? Where we do find a destruction layer is at the site of the city of Hatzor, but that fits better with the account of Devorah's defeat of the king of Hatzor, which is in Judges chapter 5, to which we referred to earlier, or it could have happened at some point at some other time. Without all the other cities, it does not add up to Joshua or a widespread conquest of the land. The archaeologists are right. There was no conquest. So this is Richard Elliott Friedman, the book that Chris Rolston cites in his blog post to say that this is essentially the position he agrees with. Now, he goes on. 2 of the earliest mentions of Israel outside of the Bible both claim that Israel is gone, erased. Neither was true. That was just what you said in the world. We killed them. We slaughtered them. Egypt said it. Moab said it. And so did Israel. They said it, but they did not do it. The conquest never happened. People have used this as proof that there was no Exodus either, but it is the opposite. It argues against the historicity of a mass Exodus, but it is consistent with our picture of an Exodus of a smaller group that was transformed and taught it as the experience and heritage of all Israel. The archaeologist William Deaver saw the same thing. He wrote, some of Israel's ancestors probably did come out of Egyptian slavery, but there was no military conquest of Canaan. And the biblical historian Baruch Halpern, too, saw the need to follow the Exodus account with the tale of conquest of the land by arriving masses from Egypt. He wrote, quote, the Exodus without the conquest would never have survived as a story. So that's Richard Elliott Friedman. But we're talking about Chris Rolston here, right? This is Chris Rolston's source. He said, basically, I agree with Richard Elliott Friedman. So I know Chris. He's a friend. We've been together at a few conferences. He responds to my emails when I send them. So I reached out, and he provided clarification for me on what he's talking about here. He says, wonderful. Some sort of exodus of a group that we refer to as Proto-Israel is compelling to me. And also additional things such as the Merneptah stele from the late 13th century comes into play at this point. Also, we do have the destruction of some, he's got this some in asterisks, some sites in the 13th century or early 12th century BCE, Lachish, Hatzor, Tel Beit Mirsim. And we also have evidence, archaeological and biblical, example from the book of Judges in the Bible, and archaeologically from sites such as Jericho and Ai, which weren't destroyed. So, complex evidence. But we do have evidence of military destruction of sites. We also have some evidence for peaceful infiltration. Finkelstein's surveys of the Judean hills, something which Alt and Noth had contended many decades ago. That is a peaceful infiltration. And even the biblical narratives suggest this as well at times. For example, the relationships with the Gibeonites, etc. And there is also some evidence from the Amarna letters of the 14th century for tensions between people groups of the Levant. In other words, I basically think that the three models normally cited should be combined into a single model. Some military conflict, some peaceful infiltration into the highlands, some tensions and conflict among the Canaanites as per Mendenhall and Gottwald, etc. My views align quite nicely with Ami Mazar's, as discussed in his book on the archaeology of the Bible. In any case, in that blog post, what I was saying is that I do believe there was some sort of exodus out of Egypt of at least some component of what came to be known as Israel. So after all that, I leave it to you. I mean, how much does Chris Rolston actually sound like he's siding with Michael and David Falk on this question of there being, an historical exodus and a conquest?
Well, he said it pretty confidently, and so, there we go.
Something else I should note here too. Chris mentioned to me that he particularly doesn't like the usage of these terms, maximalist, minimalist, or conservative or liberal, because he says they are, quote, too contextual. They, the discussions and the debates where these terms occur are pretty deep, and if you're using them among lay people, they're going to misunderstand what you're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, coming at it from more of a layperson angle, what we have is them dropping these names confidently as if it supports their views, when of course you've just shown that it doesn't. And they're like talking about the hypotheses, they're talking about like the Rendsburg theory. And what this does is it lends this credence, as if like we really know what we're talking about. We're talking about the various views in the field. We're talking about the people. Like it does a lot of work, and unfortunately it does work on their audience a lot. The real context here is that Josh didn't raise an eyebrow at the idea that there are some scholars who believe that the conquest happened. That's just not something that anyone would have a problem with. He raised an eyebrow, you raised an eyebrow, at the claim that scholars are changing their minds, that the evidence overwhelmingly supports a historical conquest. And so what they're doing with their rhetoric, what they're doing with their presentation, is this Mott and Bailey routine. They're switching it, so all of a sudden it's you guys that are making the silly claims. It's you guys that are attacking ghosts, rather than just straight up staying on the crucial disagreement and actually bolstering that instead. All right, let's now move on to what Josh said next, which involves citing Christian Frevel. So let's move on to the next segment.
Quote a recent academic publication on the history of ancient Israel to see what the field currently does say about this topic. This is Christian Frevel in the History of Ancient Israel 2023. In any discussion of the conquest of the land, it is essential to understand the conceptual contrast between an Israel that entered the country as an ethnic entity from outside and an Israel that only gradually formed within the country and emerged therefrom as a new ethnic entity. Recent research has shown that Israel is no different from its neighbors in this respect. With the exception of the Philistines, all the subsequent peoples of Palestine, for example, Moabites and Ammonites, as well as Judeans and Israelites, are predominantly indigenous. Any migration of larger parts of the population as a background for the emergence of Israel must be ruled out.
Look, the thing that struck me most from that clip is Falk's reaction to that, right? Like, it's very telling to me. This is the majority opinion, and that includes Rolstein and that includes Friedman, as I just read, right? The Israelites emerged predominantly from out of earlier groups of Canaanites.
Whoa.
This is very, very standard. Like, that's the position. That is the majority position. So the conquest of Canaan did not happen. Echoing Friedman here means, while the picture presented in the book of Joshua might contain echoes of the turbulent decades from late Bronze 2 to 3 and the Bronze Age collapse, right? a widespread destruction and depopulation of the region as envisioned by Joshua is a late fiction. That's the position. And for David to like roll his eyes and to call cut on that, like somebody's just said the most absurd thing he's ever heard. Come on. Has he read the material?
You're not being very charitable here, my friend. What can I say?
suppose
They
not.
can't respond now, you know? You're calling it as it is, and they do not like that.
Kipp Davis rules, guys.
Oh,
dual rules.
So hot. Want to touch the hiney. Arr.
We're getting all the good clips here, boys.
There's this. I mean, I just saw this. Just noted this right now. You know, I mean, Freville does take an extreme minimalist approach.
Mhm.
On page 7, Freville says, quote, Israel was never a real historical entity, end quote. I don't think, say, the mushy middle of scholarship would even take that anymore. I think that's an extreme view by any stretch of the imagination.
I love how before Josh starts, Josh is gonna
Drone
take
on.
this, but before Josh starts, I just love how confidently David Falk says end quote. There.
It's a nice.
Are we sure that's the end of the quote, David?
But they accused you of quote mining. Are you suggesting a quote mine here? Oh my.
Well, okay. I thought there are two places here that I really want to make sure that we have the broader context so that we can understand the quotes that Kipp and I are citing here, or reading here. This one and the one by Greenberg next. So here's the entire quote in context, meaning here's the rest of the context. The section from which the quote comes begins on page 5, entitled Minimalists, Maximalist, and the Sources of Israel's History. So Freville opens with this, quote, opinions differ widely on the value of the Bible as a historical source, for which the methodological distinction between minimalists and maximalists has prevailed since a controversy in the 1990s. While the so-called minimalists include biblical texts in the reconstruction of history only if they can be reconciled with non-biblical, that is, archaeological, epigraphic, iconographic evidence, maximalists take the Bible as a historical source so long as it cannot be refuted by extra-biblical evidence or is not plausible in itself. And he lists here 4 different scholars that fall into this category. Knauf, Kenton Sparks, Lester Graby, which may surprise people, and Megan Bishop Moore. End quote. What follows, however, is important. Quote, everyone agrees that a history of ancient Israel must not be allowed to dissolve into the retelling of the biblical stories. End quote. He then gives some specific examples. Quote, there are a number of examples that show that the information that the Bible provides has a high degree of plausibility in individual cases. For example, the important role of Hatzor in the late Bronze Age in Joshua 11, the note about the Aramean king Hazael, circa 845 to 800, attack on the Philistine city of Gath in 2 Kings 12, or the information that Darius I accessed an archive in Ecbatana in Ezra 6. But even these examples show how usable information stands in widely different contexts. While the military conquest recounted in the book of Joshua is ahistorical, the factuality of the Second Temple's reconstruction as recounted in Ezra is historical. End quote. He then writes, and I know it's a lot, but I promise it's worth it. Each individual passage needs to be examined to see what role it can play in a historical argument. A sweeping rejection of the Bible as a source for the history of Israel would be foolish. A complete rejection would misjudge the fact that the Bible's historiography is quite comparable in many respects to ancient historiography more broadly. This nonetheless means that the biblical historiography cannot be used uncritically in modern historical research, end quote. Now, it's in this context that we see the full quote, and here it is. It is true that Israel as portrayed in the Bible and historical Israel differ greatly, and one has to bear in mind that biblical Israel was never a real historical entity, and he says Philip R. Davies. Yet, it also must not be underestimated that both entities are related to one another. Biblical Israel, as presented in the ancient text, remains part of the historical Israel. This fact challenges a variety of differentiations due to the long history of the origins, traditions, and reception of the text, end quote. So he is drawing on this terminology from the Minimalist-Maximalist debate. He's saying, yes, there is no biblical Israel, which is like the narrative that the Hebrew Bible portrays as Israel, but there is a historical Israel, right? And that's something that biblical Israel can be used to reconstruct. Now, if there's any doubt at this point, and if you just think maybe I'm misreading what Freville is saying here, maybe you are mishearing it as the audience. My friend Heath Durrell, who taught me Akkadian my first year at Hopkins, he's a professor now. He was at Princeton for a while, and then he's now down with...
Heath Durrell taught you Akkadian?
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Wow, I didn't know that. Sorry.
No. Aaron Gwynn Villarreal and I were his two students. It was pretty cool.
So
but
cool.
She's a brilliant Hebrew Bible specialist. Anyway, but what was I saying? But Heath Durrell did a review. No, it's good. He did a review of Freville's volume. And here's what he writes about this. Heath Durrell writes concerning this section specifically that Freville, quote, briefly lays out the positions of the minimalists and the maximalists, and, like most scholars of ancient Israel, opts for a middle path between the two extremes, end quote. The use of biblical Israel by Freville here is almost certainly a technical one, as we've talked about, being contrasted with historical and ancient Israel. Emmanuel Foe describes part of the minimalist-maximalist debate in the following way, quote, the deconstruction of the concept of ancient Israel, especially by Davies' dissection of Israel into the categories of biblical, historical, and ancient, opened up the way to problematize. I liked
problematize. That was good. I like that.
Are you making fun of me?
You should go with it.
Shut up. Problematize. Problematicalize the historical evidence. To revise the relationship between archaeological and epigraphic material and biblical sources in order to think critically about the history of the Southern Levant, including precisely that multifaceted entity called Israel. So, just a little bit more. Sorry, I know it's a lot. But I think it's important to show that I feel like sometimes David Falk says things with his full chest, having moved through the data too quickly to make that pronouncement. Megan Bishop Moore and Brad Kell explain Davies' position in this way, quote, Israel as the Bible and historians imagine it, Davies argued, cannot be found in history. No such unified group existed in a tribal period or under a united monarchy, or as an overarching religious community divided into two kingdoms. Israel, Davies claimed, was the invention of Persian period scribes who sought to unify the post-exilic Jerusalemite community by creating a past for it. Davies calls the past they created biblical Israel. He further claims that scholars have taken aspects of biblical Israel, especially ones that appear to coincide with archaeological and extra-biblical textual data, and have created ancient Israel, an entity unlike biblical Israel and also unlike the real Israel of history. You can see Chapter 5 of Davies' 2015 The History of Ancient Israel, a guide for the perplexed, for a greater discussion of the issues involved. In short, however, Freville's point seems to be that the picture of Israel that is painted in the Bible, precisely in that form, did not exist in history. It seems to me that Freville is not an extreme minimalist, as Falk asserted, and so Freville's observation was anything but an extreme view by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, damn.
Grotesque incompetence.
You are playing.
Sorry, I was listening the whole time. Honest, I was listening the whole time.
Yeah, and so I think that, intended or not, Falk has stated here, has assigned to Christian Freville, this extreme position. And the way that it came across in the context was, we need to be really careful about what this guy says, because look, he's this extreme minimalist. And yet it doesn't seem like what Freville says in the broader context of the book that we're talking about, either from our perspective, our reading of it, or others like Heath Turrell, it doesn't seem like he is this extreme minimalist, but he's this mushy middle that most scholars are, that would say, yes, this construction of biblical Israel did not exist, as the narrative, sets it up, but that doesn't mean that the biblical texts are not reliable for have historical value. No. And I think that's a nuanced position, and I don't think it's fair to assign that sort of extreme position to Freville.
And to anyone watching that might be on the side of, say, Inspiring Philosophy and, of course, David, if this kind of refutation doesn't move you, I'm not sure what will. If it doesn't get you to question just how confidently he stated something, and just how, with a bit of work, you're able to unravel it to show that he's got it wrong. I mean, come on. Like, it's what I want to say from someone that may disagree, on the details and stuff. Like, surely we can agree that there's a problem there at least. And one of the issues I see is that this is something that is very frequent with David Falk. And I'll link other videos below where there's more examples of this. But how many do you need, other than the ones that you've already seen in this video, to start thinking maybe I should watch out for that confidence?
But one of the things I just noticed in the comment here was that when they talk about the peoples of the Levant, they're talking about Ammonites, Moabites, Canaanites. They're not talking about the Amorites. The Amorites are completely missing from that quote, and yet they are the dominant faction in Israel at the time of the conquest. The Canaanites aren't the dominant people politically in Israel at the time of the conquest. It's the Amorites. The Amorites conquer Canaan 100 years before the conquest and basically set up this large kingdom.
So why are you ignoring the Amorites, Dr. Josh? Come on.
Well, so there's a lot to be said here on the question of the Amorites, but I mean, just at a very basic level, Freville's quote is about the subsequent peoples of Palestine, which is why he's talking about these different groups. So, like, why he would mention the Amorites if we're talking about the subsequent peoples of Palestine? I think that's probably why. One of the reasons that the Amorites are not being brought in here.
And even insofar as the subsequent people of Palestine are concerned, like the Moabites, there's just no evidence at all of Moabite culture until like the 9th century, 10th, 9th century, right? Like it's late stuff.
And if I'm not mistaken, please tell me if I am, the Amorites themselves were not considered the foundational ethnic group from which Israel emerged. And so in the context of what was being spoken about, maybe that would be a relevant part for the missing of that particular group.
Falk and Kipp, you can talk a little bit about this if you want to. Like, Falk certainly has a view of the Amorites that it's not unique. It is consistent with a particular interpretive framework, but it's not one that scholars in the field that are subject matter experts of this particular topic hold to. I'll say that.
In fact, if you read the Amarna letters talk about how the Amorites are conquering city after city after city.
Yeah.
And this includes basically a span of territory from Byblos all the way across to the Heshbon and down into the Judean foothills.
I would say it's an absolute mystery, whatever Falk is getting at. Except that I think I have an idea of what he's trying to do here, right? So we need to talk a little bit. We need to talk maybe a lot about the Amarna letters. These are correspondences between the Egyptian pharaohs Amenhotep the third and the fourth to Canaanite vassals and rulers of Canaanite cities, and these all date to the 14th century. Yes, the 1300s. Right? So now, the Amarna letters do in fact speak at length about Amudu, which I suspect Falk is interpreting as the Amorites, which is not something that scholars do. So Amudu was a buffer kingdom that was established in the north, and it seems I'm not totally clear on this, but it seems like the Amudu kingdom was maybe established in an effort to protect Egyptian interests in Canaan from the Hittites, who were in Turkey and Anatolia. So during the reign of Amenhotep III, the Amudu began to take military actions in the small area sort of surrounding their kingdom that interfered with Egyptian control. And the king of Amudu, Azidu, ignored repeated summons to appear before Pharaoh in Egypt to explain himself. So we have a bunch of letters, particularly from the king of Byblos. His name is Ribhadi, and most of his letters are complaining about what the Amudu are doing in his area, and he's telling the pharaoh that they're rallying people, they're rallying these brigands known as the Apidu, and he's worried that their plan is basically to rebel against Egypt. So yeah, where was I? So Azidu's actually he ignores repeated summons to come and appear before Pharaoh in Egypt to explain himself. Without getting into it, eventually Amudu, along with Kadesh, defected to ally themselves with Hatti, but Kadesh seems to have supported the Apidu raids in Bashan all the way into the Bika Valley, perhaps as far as Upper Galilee. Remember what Falk said here. He said that the Amorites controlled the region all the way from Byblos to Heshbon and into the Galilean, the Judean highlands. What I'm talking about is a region that's far north of that. Byblos, yes, but Heshbon, which is in the Transjordan, that's on the other side of the Jordan River, basically parallel in terms of latitude, I think, with what is it? It's north of the Dead Sea. Are you more clear on that, Josh?
Where Heshbon
is.
Is
that about right? Yeah.
It's in the Madaba Plains. Yeah, just over to the east side of the Dead Sea.
But this is way farther south than anything that the Amudu were doing. That is being mentioned in the Amarna letters. So if there's any references to the Amudu forces gaining control in Canaan of Canaanite cities in the Judean Hill Country and the Transjordan, I can't find them. I've read through a bunch of the Amarna material. I've done searches of the Amarna material. I can't find any references to the Amudu entering into the Judean highlands, into what we tend to think of as southern Canaan. So there's over 70 texts in the Amarna letters which feature the Amudu, and these mostly belong to these correspondences between the king of Byblos and the pharaohs. There's nothing at all about a sweeping Amudu campaign to occupy southern Canaan, which for the entirety of the 14th century was controlled by the Egyptians, who also exerted power over the Amudu kingdom, the same Amudu kingdom that they helped to establish. So if David Falk would like to learn more about this, there's a phenomenal discussion of the historical, political context of the Amarna period in the massive 2-volume tome by Anson Rainey, the Amarna correspondence from 2015. And I can include a link to that. It's probably a far too expensive book for anybody to buy. But the point here's the point, right? He seems to be conflating the idea of the Amorites with the mention of the Amudu in the Amarna letters. The Amudu are this kingdom quite far in the north of, proper Israel, Palestine. And they don't have anything to do with what's going on in southern Canaan. And in fact, we do have, in the Amarna archive, we also have correspondences between southern Canaanite kings from Samaria, from Jerusalem. I think there might be some from Lachish, from these southern Canaanite kings, and they never mention the Amudu. So most scholars, as far as I'm aware, scholars don't think that the Amudu were the Amorites. I know it sounds similar, and it's kind of fun to make these connections with words that sound similar, but that's not what scholars are doing. And the ideas that Falk has forwarded on the basis of his reading of the Amarna letters is just, I don't know what it is.
Well, and I think that part of the issue here is that when you have a particular interpretive framework through which you view the Hebrew Bible, I mean, we have the Amorites mentioned throughout the narratives that discuss this particular series of events. So you end up having the Amorite kings, Sihon and Og, right over in Transjordan. You have Amorite kings over on the west side of the Jordan. So when you bring that together with the Amarna archive, understanding the Amarna archive in the way that it seems like you must be, then you end up with this, wow, you've got this huge area that the Amorites are covering. And
from Byblos to Heshbon into the Judean highlands.
So that people know, neither Kipp nor I have any expertise in
none.
The Amorite language, Amorite culture. What is the Amorite culture? Is there an Amorite ethnicity? What does that mean? It's all incredibly complex. If people are interested in starting to scratch the surface of this topic, Dan Fleming's got a great article in I can't remember the title of the book now. It's sitting on my shelf. I can see where it is on my shelf in my mind's eye. But it's different groups that show up with respect to the Hebrew Bible. And the Amorites, the first one. So if you just search on Daniel Fleming, Fleming, I think it's actually available for free on his academia page. But Robert Holmshire, I think he got his PhD at Chicago, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But he writes pretty extensively about the Amorites, and he pushes back on people like Aaron Burke. Aaron Burke has a 2018 article, I think, and then he recently, 2023, maybe, published a book on the Amorites, and is this Koine? Anyway, this stuff is really complex. And my friend John Caleb Howard out at Tyndale works on Amorite personal names. So he deals with some of the linguistic stuff. But anyway, the point is that people that work on this, generally speaking, unless they have prior theological commitments, it would seem, do not just take the Hebrew Bible, the biblical texts, and say, all right, we need to use this to inform our understanding of the Amorites in the late Bronze Age. That's not, they don't just like read it and say, all right, well, it says Sihon and Og are here and these kings over on the west side, or so that this is where the Amorites must. They don't do that. And it's much more nuanced, much more complex than that. The Amorites are something that show up in Mesopotamia in the third millennium, the end of the third millennium. You start to see them, of course, in the beginning of the second millennium. You get these like Amorite dynasties. Hammurabi is one of them, that show up and sort of take control. But what does that mean? Is this a people group that's infiltrating from the outside, or these pastoral nomads that are coming from the Jebel Bishri that have always sort of been around, wandering about, and they're just very complicated and not the same throughout every time period. So when you talk about the Amorites in the third millennium, you're not necessarily talking about the same thing that's going on in the middle of the second millennium, and damn sure not at the end of the late Bronze Age. So like, it's all very complicated, very nuanced, and I think that that's not the picture that we're getting from David Falk here.
Yeah, absolutely not. What you get from all of these moves, all of these statements from David, that, we'll put it this way, he's making these controversial claims, these very convoluted and complex claims, and there's not even a hint, there's no hint at all that what he's saying is problematic, that what he's saying is going to get pushback from scholars. And it seems to me that when it comes to someone in the field making a statement like this, it is their due diligence to make clear to an audience that's not as knowledgeable in the topic that you're putting out a view that isn't held, especially if it's held by only a small number of people. And yet none of this is what we see in David at all with anything that he has to say. And it is very reminiscent of the apologetic modus operandi. Everything they do is under this rubric. It's just the passive way of speaking, no matter how fringe a view may be, and no matter how lacking in resources and receipts they might be in that view.
2019 monograph on the archaeological analysis of the Levant during the Bronze Age. The late second millennium conquest of Canaan by Joshua was also considered by Yagel Yaden, he was the excavator at Hatzor, and others as historically accurate and archaeologically verifiable. In recent decades, however, a critical shift in biblical historical studies, combined with new interpretations of ancient settlement patterns based on extensive surveys conducted largely in the occupied West Bank, have led many scholars to relegate both the patriarchal narrative and the Israelite conquest to the status of historical fable. The frontier between conservative and deconstructionist archaeologist historians, that is, between those who uphold the historical authenticity of traditions related to the Israelite ethnogenesis and state formation, and those who reject it, has shifted, for the most part, to the first millennium, leaving the second millennium outside of the mainstream of the debate and in a state of relative intellectual quiescence.
Okay, so that's what we've got so far, and now we're going to hear what David and Michael had to say in response. So let's hear it.
They leave out a certain sentence on here that I think changes the entire complexion of what Greenberg is saying here.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got the quote up here, which is, nevertheless, a strong tradition of data accumulation and description continues to contribute incrementally to the archaeological reservoir, while interpretive approaches remain underdetermined.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There we go.
That's a critical word in this.
Yeah, but maybe not in the way that you think it is.
Well, I don't know, Kipp. It's an accusation of quote mining. Maybe you can expand on how it's not quite the way that they think it is.
We'll let Josh go on this. But I'm just going to say, in terms of a quote mine, oftentimes the way this works is like it seems to me in this instance, David and Michael have settled on this sentence as a means to counter the point that I've just made about how current archaeological surveys in terms of exploring the history of Israel don't tend to take place in the Bronze Age anymore. They're all, in the Iron Age. That's where the evidence is. And they've used this little bit that Greenberg has included in his book here as a means to counter that. But it feels desperate to me, right? Like because it doesn't say what Falk thinks it says. It feels like he's frantically looking through the book and looks like, oh well, this looks promising as a convincing counter argument. But I don't think it does.
I mean, does the addition that he read out, does it actually change the point that you were making at all?
No.
And yet that's precisely what he needs it to do for it to be of any relevance, for him to be able to justify being so irate and upset and accusatory towards you doing something that's fallacious, that's wrong, that's, gross negligence. And yet if he doesn't have that, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, let's assume best case scenario for him here, right? And I'm going to talk about why I don't think it is a best case scenario for him. But let's assume that what Greenberg is saying is that there's quiescence because it's underdetermined. It still stands firmly against the point that Michael was making, because Michael was saying there's overwhelming evidence for the things that we're talking about.
Yes.
So if there's quiescence because it's underdetermined, that's not a good thing for their position, right?
Also, what is the default view of these things, right? So if something is underdetermined, maybe some people's intuitions make them think that it should be 50-50, but that's not really how it works. Like, we don't really know the answer to many things, and yet 50-50 isn't where we land. It's actually pretty much on no, not unless there's sufficient evidence for me to believe it. And so the fact that when David or when anyone hears some other claims where there's not enough information to say it did or didn't happen, they don't run around in this agnostic fashion. They actually run around in this atheist fashion, in this, no, I need more evidence. There needs to be more here. So the burden of proof here seems to be something that is not being acknowledged, at least by my lights, the way that I see it, with the gravitas that it should have.
This is why this minimalist-maximalist, one of the reasons that this minimalist-maximalist debate, I think, got so much traction and I think has been good for the field.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it pushes back on this default position. People thought for the longest time the Hebrew Bible is, in broad strokes, historically reliable. And so if it says something about Abraham, says something about Isaac, says something about Jacob, says something about, whatever, Joseph, Moses, when we dig down in the ground, we're going to find the evidence for that because it's basically historically reliable. We should be giving these texts the benefit of the doubt, right? We should assume they're true until evidence, comes contrary to it. And that seems to be, so that's where that debate is, right? And so the minimalist says, we're not believing anything until extra biblical sources, come about that can say, yep, it confirms that that's the case. On the other end of the extreme, like the extreme maximalist is going to say, nope, we're going to believe it unless we have evidence, firmly against it, right? That and sort of that's why we talk about that spectrum in the middle, right? I think for the like when let's take it outside of the Bible. When we talk about Naram Sin, and Naram Sin writes in the 23rd century, he says, or it's written about him that he fought 9 battles in 1 year. Well, and that was the thing that got him deified, right? That he fought off these major coalitions, one from the north, one from the south. Like, do I think that story actually reflects reality precisely as he wrote it on the ground? Do I think that all of these, I mean, maybe Amargirid really had all these people as a coalition against him. I mean, it is a royal inscription, so, we're going to approach that with the requisite skepticism. We're going to say, were there probably battles? Yeah. Like, did something probably happen here? It was pretty big in his reign? Probably. Yeah. Does it happen exactly as the inscription says? Probably not. Right. But, but see, for something like that, nobody worships Naram Sin. Nobody holds him as a deity. So, that's not a lot to lose there, not a lot of skin in the game. But that's how we approach the text. So, when you start off, if you want to be like, yeah, all right, we got this story, and yeah, I mean, it says here that, Moses led these people out of Egypt. Okay, I mean, like, seems like that might be obviously not like the miraculous stuff, the fire and the smoke. Well, probably not that stuff. But people coming up out of Egypt, that makes sense. That could happen, right? But that's not where we are anymore. Right? Nobody just, because we have done so much archaeological work in the region, specifically for the purpose of establishing the validity of that claim or those claims. And so now it's not this, hey, we have to start with, we give it the benefit of the doubt because we're not there anymore. That's not how it works. We don't just assume it to be true, and then say, all right, you have to prove it wrong by the archaeological material, because that's the issue here, right? If you go to Heshbon, if you go to Dibon, if you go to Jericho, like a lot of these things, they have minimal material culture from the late Bronze Age that is in like fill deposits, right? Yeah, what I think at Heshbon, what do you have? Like, it's a handful. 3, 6, 9, I don't even know if it's that many pottery sherds that are late Bronze Age. I mean, it's like next to nothing, right? And they're in secondary context, they're in deposits. So the problem is, you can't build a case with that. You can't build a case to say, yep, there was this kingdom here, and this establishes that Joshua, but they don't need that, because they say the default position is it happened. Now, Heshbon, we don't have the material to you can't build an argument against it. So it continues to stand true. And that's not how this works. That's not how this works.
Yeah, complete flipping of the burden of proof. And also, if you have a story that's quite benign, then it's much easier to exercise, putting your hands up and going, okay, there was a conflict between Hannibal Barca in this one location. We don't have much evidence for it in terms of archaeology, but we have a little bit of text. Most of it comes from Roman sources, and, they would have written it in a way that's very beneficial to them. So I'm not really sure, it may be like that's the way that it comes out with certain conflicts at least. But then what happens if you have a miracle claim? Well, by its very nature, or even if it comes from a source that has miracles in it, it has a dude splitting the sea. Like, all of a sudden, this isn't the same game. This is a completely different game. And one thing that seems to have, like, this memo seems to be getting across in the relevant fields that we're discussing here, but it has absolutely landed in science, is when we started doing science, a lot of people were going out there to vindicate God. They went out there with their books and they went, right, I'm going to show that the earth is X years old. I'm going to go out there and get proof of divine creation. And yet, what was allowed back then is to have that as your modus operandi. It's true. It's true. Let's go find the evidence. Whereas now we're at a point where that's laughed out of the science classroom. That's pathetic. It's not allowed. Like, that is not science. That is theology at best. It's more dogmatic, apologetic nonsense. And yet it seems that it's perfectly okay to have people that are working in these fields, or at least in tangential fields, like wearing it on their sleeve as if it's a boast that actually, I'm going to work with, it probably is true, and you have to prove me wrong. It's like playing tennis without the net.
It explains why the debate has gone into quiescence. What is underdetermined? It means when you don't have enough data to decide one way or the other. It's not that there's no evidence and that there's negative evidence. It's that there's not enough evidence to decide one way or the other. And that's why the debate has gone into quiescence, not because the evidence is so overwhelmingly against it.
And remember, that's their scholar they're quoting. They seem to be taking him a little bit out of context. And it's not one we've quoted, but that's what their scholar.
Yes.
Yeah. So got a little bit of appears to be a quote mine there. Don't think that's really
just a little
fair representation. Yeah, just a little bit.
I guess we'll look at the whole quote there. The whole
probably
section.
The best thing to do when there's such an accusation.
Set this into its proper context here.
I do want to point out that now it has shifted. The dialectic has shifted, right? The reason that this passage by Greenberg was quoted, as you pointed out, Stephen, was to address this overwhelming evidence in favor of these events. And now his last statement, because the evidence is so overwhelmingly against it, well, that's not what anybody has argued here, right?
Indeed, yeah, it's a complete shift of the dialectic.
So, as above, let's put this quote by Greenberg in its context. This quote comes from the introduction to his 2019 publication on Levantine Bronze Age archaeology and appears in the section describing the developments and trends in the field since its inception. After providing a brief historical overview, Greenberg writes, quote, "Among the states and national territories in the modern Levant, Israel is the most intensely excavated, especially along its densely developed coast, and maintains the highest level of research activity due to its stable economy and administration, strong ties to the Western academic tradition, and the allure of its biblical past. There are more than 25,000 registered antiquities sites in Israel proper, within its pre-1967 borders. Most of the country has been subjected to systematic surveys, the results of which are largely accessible in print and online. About 300 salvage and 50 research excavations by local and overseas institutions are licensed annually, including scores of sites and cemeteries with Bronze Age remains. Between 1967 and 1990, some 6,000 archaeological sites were recorded and hundreds excavated." End quote. He then focuses on the last 70 years, explaining that there has been a shift, quote, "accommodating the shifting frontier between reliable and mythical historical traditions. In the first 3 or 4 decades of nationhood, the biblical archaeology paradigm established by William F. Albright and his school was dominant among Israeli archaeologists. Under this paradigm, it was asserted that biblical history, extra-biblical texts, and archaeology could be reconciled from the beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE onward, and that this reconciliation could best be effected through meticulous stratigraphic excavations and the creation of cultural typologies at large archaeological mounds. The first major tell excavation in Israel was conducted by Yigal Yadin at Hatzor in 1955 through 1958, and its results were considered to confirm a portrait of second millennium Canaan that melded biblical and extra-biblical sources into a consistent picture of the patriarchal period. The late second millennium conquest of Canaan by Joshua was also considered by Yadin and others as historically accurate and archaeologically verifiable. Now, here's the quote. In recent decades, however, a critical shift in biblical historical studies, combined with new interpretations of ancient settlement patterns based on extensive surveys conducted largely in the occupied West Bank, have led many scholars to relegate both the patriarchal narrative and the Israelite conquest to the status of historical fable. Now let's pause. It seems as though Greenberg has laid out the history of archaeological investigation in the region, showing that a relatively high number of sites have been investigated in Israel, and that the early archaeological excavations understood the biblical text to be historically reliable in the patriarchal and the Exodus conquest narratives, presumably set in the second millennium BCE. Yadin's excavations at Hatzor in the late 50s was cited to show that he concluded, based on his work at the site, that the evidence confirmed the general historicity of the patriarchal narrative. However, more recently, there has been a move away from this idea that the patriarchal narratives, along with the Exodus and conquest stories, are historically reliable. Instead, they are now considered by many to be in the category of historical fable. Now, he continues, the frontier between conservative and deconstructionist archaeologist historians, that is, between those who uphold the historical authenticity of traditions relating to the Israelite ethnogenesis and state formation, and those who reject it, has shifted for the most part to the first millennium, leaving the second millennium outside the mainstream debate and in a state of relative intellectual quiescence. The third millennium or early Bronze Age had never been seen as more than a prelude to biblical history. Pause again. So, where are the debates now being fought? Are they over the events of the second millennium? No, says Greenberg, they are being fought over events in the first millennium. The second millennium, as with the third millennium, has been left behind. He concludes, nonetheless, a strong tradition of data accumulation and description, excavation, archiving, and publication continues to contribute incrementally to the archaeological reservoir, while interpretive approaches remain underdetermined and tend to combine political history, historical geography, and elements of processual archaeology's social and geographic theory. End quote. I don't think Greenberg's statement about underdetermination here has to do with something like, quote, we don't debate the Exodus and conquest anymore because we just don't have enough information to make a good determination about it. He has just said that the archaeological data is what brought about just such a change over the last 70 years. Instead, I think he is focusing on archaeological interpretive methods, things like entanglement, the use of processual archaeology, etc. In the final paragraph of the section, Greenberg summarizes, and I'll end with this. Broadly speaking, then, the archaeology of the Levant has recently begun to release itself from the grip of the biblical cultural history paradigm of its late 19th to early 20th century progenitors, to become engaged with wider concerns in the history of the Mediterranean and Western Asia. And so, hold on, I should close with this because I had it separated in my notes here. So, they accuse us of doing a quote mine. Here's what I wrote. Well, let's evaluate that claim. If you recall, the reason that Frevel and Greenberg were cited in the original video was to respond to Michael's statement, quote, well, it seems to be shifting more in the direction of historicity. It definitely seems to be moving away from the old Deaver or Finkelstein idea that this was all mythology written later. First of all, saying that that's Deaver's position is funny. Now, that still seems to be the consensus, especially among critical scholars, for sure. But the evidence overwhelmingly supports an historical conquest. A lot of what you're going to hear is that, well, there was no evidence of widespread mass destruction throughout Canaan. Is the field shifting, quote, in the direction of historicity or away from it? Freville's quote indicates that the field is moving away from the veracity of the historical claims of the Hebrew Bible in the periods under discussion, and this is precisely what Greenberg states as well.
But Greenberg is probably just an extreme minimalist.
Probably, and we're just quote mining him.
To make sure that we really get this right, you gave a quote. They accused you of quote mining, and in the process actually quote mined it to say the complete opposite.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Sick flex, Dr. Josh. Well played.
I mean, to be fair, as I want to be, right? Like, this stuff
there's no being fair to that. That's such bullshit.
I'll say this, all right? And I hope that people can appreciate with the amount of time and energy that that we have to put into this, right? Like, I mean, we're like 8 minutes into this response. This stuff is hard. And it's incredibly nuanced, which is why scholars aren't arriving at these pat answers and just accepting on the face of it what the biblical text has to say about the period and the region, right? It's an incredibly complex web of disciplines working together to discover the history of ancient Israel. And like Josh and I did our best to sort of convey, a basic idea of what the field looks like in like a 90-minute animated video with our friend Apologia. But when you get into the weeds of this stuff, it gets really, really hard. And that's why this is taking so much time and so much energy.
And believe me, and Kipp will agree with this 100%. This is not us going at this alone. I mean, the amount of emails, the amount of interaction that we've had with other scholars in the field that are subject matter experts. Some people are super excited to engage on this topic. Some people are like, oh my God, please don't drag me into this. And more sympathetic I could not be. But, we are definitely, I don't have any problem ever being wrong. I mean, I hope that that's the case for me. That's what I strive for. I'm sure that I do fail at that. But my goal is to, I want to be able to be wrong, because there's no reason in holding on to a bad position in what we do. And the sooner I can get that out of the way, the better. So I'm perfectly open to being called out and to being wrong. It might sting, it might hurt, I might feel stupid, and the imposter syndrome wasn't a syndrome. I really do suck at this. All those things are going to go through my brain. But the reality here is that if I'm going to do this, there's no advantage to me hanging on to bad information. So that's why we're trying to get this stuff reviewed when we are not subject matter experts. And the thing that we continue to hear over and over and over and over and over again is, where did he get that? I need a citation for that. I've never heard that before. Yeah. That's definitely not what's held in the field. And that's from,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of
like,
3 different people off the top of my head right now that had similar responses that are subject matter experts in the field. So,
yeah, and I think a lot of Inspiring Philosophy's audience just isn't aware of this stuff because, as we said earlier, he's been either consciously or unconsciously selective in which parts he's showing to his audience. And when he has David on, making this big, wow, look, Kipp, you've managed to quote mine. Yeah, they're not going to see it. And that's unfortunate. But to those that are really interested in what the experts are saying, here you go. There you go. We've read out the rest of it. They're banking on you being bored by the fact that it actually takes work. You actually have to read the context. They're banking on you doing that. And it's sad, but it does have relative effectiveness. But that's a sick flex. I'm just saying, like, if to accuse someone of quote mining and in the process quote mine, mwah, David, oh, it's beautiful.
There are some things he does really well.
And on that bombshell, we're going to wrap up this first episode. Josh, Kipp, I really, really appreciate your work. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for getting involved in this, in apologetics, really, in being able to expose this. It's really important. So just, thank you so much for your time. And I'm looking forward to hanging out again, and we'll continue this so that we can expose more of the flaws in Inspiring Philosophy and David Falk.
Well, thank you, Stephen.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you having us on.
It's been great being here.